Is it time for you to do a capital campaign?
Hi, I'm Amy Eisenstein. I'm here with my co-founder and colleague and partner, Andrea Kihlstedt. And today we are talking about the cadence or timing of campaigns. Andrea, what are your thoughts, some initial thoughts? Maybe how did this topic come up for you? Or how do you think organizations should think about when to do their next campaign? Or maybe it's their first campaign?
Yes, thanks, Amy. I want to start with a notion that campaigns are good for organizations, that they really move organizations forward, that they are good for strengthening the fundraising program, for strengthening the bonds and relationships with donors, for getting the organization to think clearly about what the next steps in its growth are going to be, that campaigns are healthy. And an organization should do them every once in a while. Yes. So that raises the question of, well, what is every once in a while, right? And the standard way to think about this, and there are lots of variations that we'll talk about, but the standard way to think about how often to do a campaign is that you should do one at least every 10 years. Why every 10 years? Well, think about it this way. It's a cycle. You have 3 years to plan what your organization is going to do, because you don't, of course, just raise money. You raise money in a campaign to do something bigger, better, different than you're currently doing. So you need 3 years to plan that effectively. Then you need 3 years to plan and execute your campaign.
Or four. 3 or 4.
3 or 4.
Yeah.
That's 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
Then you need some years to collect all of the pledges, because in campaigns, people don't give just checks. They actually pledge their gifts, usually over 3 years. And if people, give in the middle of the campaign, then their 3-year pledge period just starts then. So by the time all of your donors have finished making their gifts, that's 9 years.
Well, and of course, in those last few years, you need to build the project.
That's right. So, and in the 10th year, not only do you need to finish building the project, but you need to run it smoothly and successfully.
Right. And steward the donors.
And steward the donors. Exactly. Exactly. Now, what happens then you move back into a planning period, right? That first 3-year planning period where you're doing strategic planning and you're saying, well, okay, we've done this. Now what's next? And you move right back into that cycle. So 10 years is kind of a nice, easy to remember number. Maybe it's 12 years, maybe it's 9 years, but maybe it's 15 years, but something around that is a nice cycle for significant campaigns. And organizations should be thinking in that cycle. You shouldn't just think, well, we did one campaign, that's it. You should be thinking right. about, well, what's next? And how do we cycle into the next campaign? What is that going to take?
And give yourself time between campaigns, not only to collect pledges, but really to implement and execute the project well, so that you can really steward the donors and make sure that they understand the impact that it had, and give it a little chance to run before you start planning the next project. That gap in between one campaign and another is important for the organization, for your relationships with donors. But the key is not to drop the relationships with donors that gave to the campaign between campaigns. And that, I have to say, is something we see too often. And usually it's because staff is moving around after a campaign. Staff go elsewhere, and then some of those relationships suffer, or the fundraising, falls through the cracks a bit. So I really want to emphasize there's a lot of work to be done between campaigns in order to get ready for the next one.
So, okay. Amy, let me give you a story, just a very specific story. So
Great.
just last week, we got a call from a former client saying, hey, we're thinking about another campaign. All right, that's interesting. So we had a long conversation, and it turns out that about 10 years ago, they started their planning process for a new building. They spend about 2 or 3 years planning the building, buying the land, figuring out what was going to go on in the building, developing clear plans. After the first 2 or 3 years, they started working on a campaign. They raised a ton of money for their campaign. They built the building. They started using the building, and they're now just finishing their second year of having run programs in the building and having brought their donors into the building to see it and having stewarded everybody. And the campaign is done, and it was a big success. The building itself has been a big success. And lo and behold, if they didn't get a call from one of their major campaign donors saying, hey, I have some money I'd like to give away, and what can I do to make your life easier? What can I do to help strengthen the next part of this organization? And that got them thinking that maybe it's time for a new campaign.
Well, that's because they had done a really good job stewarding her. She came to every concert. She came to every program.
That's right.
She was involved, invited, saw the results of her earlier investment. So, I mean, I don't want people to think it's out of the blue or, that unusual either. If you do stewardship well, those kinds of things happen more frequently than you'd think.
Well, and I think, though, that, they had this concern about, well, is it too soon? Are our donors going to be upset if we go back now? They've just finished paying off their pledges. Is it too soon? Should we hold off for a while? When this donor put her hand up and said, well, hey, what can I do to help now? And that got them thinking about their next campaign cycle.
And it'll take a year or two for them to plan.
That's right.
It's fine. That's good.
That's exactly right. So that happens to be in real life. I mean, we just heard from them last week.
Well, I think the fun part of us now being around in the iteration, I mean, you've been doing capital campaigns for, I don't know, X number of decades, right? And I've been doing them for decades too. But Capital Campaign Pro has been around now for about 8 years. And we actually are starting to see lots of our early campaigns coming back to start thinking about their next campaigns, which is so exciting and so meaningful that that people want to, do their next campaign. And of course, we're over the moon that they want to come back and use us again.
Right now, Amy,
not surprised, but delighted.
Yes. There's something else I want to put in the mix here, right? Campaigns don't exist by themselves. They are not really about money. Campaigns really are about generating the fuel, the financial fuel, to move an organization forward. So campaigns dovetail with effective planning, right? And effective governance.
Right.
They don't just, it's not just, well, let's get some more money. It's, what are we going to do next? What can we do that will serve our community better? What can we do to improve or expand our services to make a bigger difference in the world? And when you pair that with campaign planning, which of course raises the money to accomplish what it is you've decided as you look forward for your organization, that's the ideal. Now, many organizations have big ideas and big projects, a big building or something like that, only every 15 years or so, maybe even longer than that. That doesn't mean that you can't have smaller campaigns in the middle, right? That you can't say, well, we've been really successful, and we realize that if we could raise $1 million or $2 million now, we could buy several buses to facilitate the transportation to our organization, or we could do something else specific that is not a $15, $20, $25 million campaign, but this smaller lift, but would also give you a chance to go back to some of your donors. So while you have this bigger cycle, this bigger 10 or 12 year cycle, you might have some mini campaigns in the middle of that.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about a few reasons, continuing this theme of timing. when organizations might not be ready for a campaign or when they're overdue potentially for a campaign. And I just want to stress that if your organization is operating at a deficit and your annual fundraising is not doing well, a campaign is not going to fix that. It's not going to get you out of a hole the way some people think it will, right? If we have big plans, we're going to be able to raise all this money. So I just, people come to us and ask, are we ready for a campaign? What's the timing of a campaign? Our organization has been around for XYZ years. Sometimes it's a short amount of time, but sometimes they've been around for decades. So it's not the actual age of an organization. It's sort of the maturity of an organization. So while I really believe that campaigns can be jet fuel for your major gift program and your annual fundraising, you can't come in sort of so behind the 8 ball and expect a campaign to get you out of a hole. I don't know if that's related to timing, but I wanted to throw it in.
Yes, I think it's such an important point. And of course, we do hear from organizations like that, right? That the only fundraising we do is our gala. And, can we have a campaign, right? We don't have any annual fundraising. Right. Well, difficult to do that, right? Campaigns favor organizations that have effective annual fundraising, that have built relationships with donors over time. And the donors have come to trust them, to trust the organization, to know what the organization does and to like the organization. That then leads to their being ready to give bigger campaign gifts.
Right. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a robust major gift program, although certainly that is helpful. Often campaigns fuel major gift programs, but you do need to have solid annual fundraising, whether it's direct mail, online, email, combinations of various things, programs, events, those kinds of things that do generate repeat donors and loyal donors and increased donations amount over time. Then you can start to work with those in more personal ways. And that's when a campaign also can be really effective.
Amy, successful campaigns, whether they're big campaigns or smaller campaigns, are so healthy for an organization. They provide opportunities to strengthen your relationship with donors. They build excitement among board members. They push board members to be more committed and more involved in their organization. They push the staff, the development staff and the executive staff to understand real fundraising, to understand what it is to go out and ask someone for $1 million or for $5 million, right? To have the courage to deal with bigger numbers, right? And to get out of this sort of poverty mentality that drives so many organizations and hinders their fundraising. And a campaign forces you out of that.
Well, it creates an opportunity also to improve your systems and staffing and development infrastructure behind the scenes. It really, it builds capacity. That's what it does. It doesn't just build a building or expand your programs. It also expands your internal fundraising savvy and expertise and ability and capabilities. So all around good things. So I guess if you're listening to the podcast, you're planning for a campaign or you're in a campaign, but you may be working at an organization that's, thinking about it. So hopefully this was helpful, or maybe you're ready for your next campaign and wondering on the timing. So that's what really this episode was about, the timing of the campaign. And you might be asking, is it too soon? So maybe it's time for a smaller campaign, or maybe you are ready to start planning the next campaign. So either way, we hope you'll reach out and talk to us. Visit the capitalcampaignpro.com website and sign up to talk to us and see how we might be able to help you with planning your next campaign. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.